Welcome to today's webinar, The Social and Economic Integration of Migrant Women. And this webinar is a collaboration with the French Embassy and the German Embassy here in Stockholm. So I would like to first of all thank you for the good partnership and the good cooperation with the French and German Embassy. My name is Therese Lindström, and I am the Director of Migration and Integration Program here at the Liberal and Green think tank Fores. And for the next 2 hours, we will be listening to experts from France, Germany, and Sweden to find out what has been done in order to support women into the labor market coming to our respective countries, with the objective today to find out what we can learn from each other. And in addition to hearing from each country's most prominent experts in their field, who will give a different perspective of the respective countries, we will also hear from experts working more directly with migrant women. We will end today's discussion with the experts in a panel discussion. And so if you as a viewer has any questions that you would like answered, please feel free to ask them in the comment section below on YouTube, on your YouTube channel. And as you can hear, we have a lot of things we can learn today, and I will not waste any more of our time talking, but instead introduce our first speaker, which is Susanne Ackum. And Susanne Ackum is from Sweden. She has a PhD in economics, is a former state secretary at the Ministry of Finance, and an audit director general at IFAO, and also currently a colleague of mine at Fores. Welcome, Susanne.
Thank you, Therese. I hope you can hear me, and I'm now trying to share my screen. It is actually working. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about labor force participation of foreign-born women in Sweden. So I will concentrate on saying a little bit of why I think this is important. We will take a quick look at data for Sweden, and then I will discuss causes of variation in labor force participation from research, mostly Swedish research. It's fair to say that I think progress is necessary to especially counteract polarization in Sweden. And as you can see, there is no simple solution or one size fits all to this problem. Instead, work has to be done on all margins. And I will discuss what all these margins are. Well, first of all, why is this important? Well, of course, it's important for the individual when it comes to income and pension. It's also important for labor supply for employers. And the economy is also sub-optimizing when it doesn't use the entire labor force. And of course, it's also a matter of sustainability of public finances. If people are employed, they contribute to our public finances. If they have to live on benefits, it is the opposite way around. Also, I think this issue is very important for the notion of polarization or what's happening in our societies. Income distribution widens when some people are not working. And unemployment is contagious within and between generations. And the notion of us and them in society increases the risk of social unrest. Worth noting here in Sweden is that we have had refugee immigration from countries with relative poor educational systems and also with low labor force participation among women. And this is important since research suggests that people bring along their norms from their home countries. It is also the case that women's reason for immigration to Sweden differs from men's. It's more family related than labor market related. So let's have a quick look at data. This is the rate of employment among women and men in Sweden, divided between foreign versus native born. age 15 to 74, 2006 to 2020. It's just worth noting that native-born men and women have rather high employment rate. It's above 70% for men, and it's above 65% for women. And the dotted lines are foreign-born men and women. And the lowest dotted line, the gray line, is for foreign-born women. And as you can see, they have a rather lower employment rate than anyone else on the labor market. And it's actually about 15% difference between foreign and native-born women. So this is the state of the art, what we are talking about. So let's move into research. What are the explanatory factors that foreign-born women, to a lesser extent, are employed on the Swedish labor market? Well, I will discuss this and divide the discussion into labor supply factors and then labor demand factors. If we start with labor supply, I will quickly look at some results from the refugee reception, active labor market policy, benefits and taxes, and look to some individual characteristics such as education, language skill, networks, and housing, norms, and social interactions. If we look at the refugee reception in Sweden, it seems to be good in theory, judged by the OECD, but less so in practice. It's about implementation and quality in the measures that we are providing to the refugees. There are significant lead times without activities. And the activities during asylum seeking is partly unknown, so we can't really evaluate what is going on. And those who are, that we know about, are not according to best practice. And best practice here means that once you enter Sweden, best practice would be to activate refugees as soon as possible. That is not the case. And it also seems that women are underrepresented in activities with a positive result. And the positive results here is about having a probability of being employed on the regular labor market. And it's also the case that bureaucrats sometimes discriminate. It seems like they look at foreign-born women and think that there is one size fits all. And they are not looked upon with individual competencies. We also have a lot of active labor market policy in Sweden. And it seems like intensified coaching helps individuals. Foreign-born women are overrepresented in preparatory training compared with vocational training. This is not so strange, since foreign-born women to a high degree have rather poor education before they came to Sweden. So they really need preparatory training before they go into vocational training. But the case is that vocational training to a higher degree leads to a permanent position on the labor market. So it is important that this preparatory training results in vocational training later on. Foreign-born women compared with men are overrepresented in subsidized work within the public sector. And this is a good thing because it seems like this type of subsidized work to a high degree leads to a permanent position. Another thing worth noting is that large wage subsidies are sometimes not enough for employers to hire. They feel unsecure in the productivity of people coming from abroad. So if we then go into the benefits and the tax system, generous parental leave, child support, family supplements, along with housing benefits, it reduces labor force participation among women in general, but especially so for foreign-born women. all these benefits are non-labor income and can make women feel comfortable about their income, so they don't have to look for a job on the labor market. And especially so since some of these benefits are means tested, which means that the tax and the benefit system together creates threshold effects. If you move into the labor market, have an income, the benefit will be reduced, and sometimes to the same amount. So there is no income increase from entering the labor market. But there are rather low marginal effects once you work, since the wages are rather low for immigrant women. Education is a very important determinant of the success on the labor market. And as I said before, refugee women who came during 2014 and 15 had rather low education. 50% of them had an education corresponding to elementary school in Sweden, and 20% of them had lesser than so. But more important than that, I think that you can see that 35% of the children with foreign-born parents do not graduate from elementary school in Sweden today, which means that the second generation of immigrants might have huge problem entering the labor market in the future. And it's also the case that 55% of the children with parents with foreign background do not graduate from elementary school. So this, what I'm trying to show is that we might even have a second generation problem, because if you don't have a gymnasium degree in Sweden, you do have rather low employment rate in Sweden. Other things to note about the educational system is that a foreign education pays less than an equivalent Swedish education. But it's also a little bit more problematic that foreign-born do not get the same return as Swedish-born for the same education, even though it's a Swedish education. So there is a lot to do within the educational system here in Sweden. Language skills. I think that recent Swedish research points to an increasing significance of having language skills to be able to enter the labor market. We also know that networks are important for being called to a job interview and for subsequent hiring. Network here means that you know someone who has a position on the labor market. It's also the case that where you live can reinforce success or failure on the labor market. The local labor market situation matters. If you live somewhere that there are a lot of vacancies, you have a higher probability of getting a job, and the other way around. It's also the notion of segregation. It depends on your neighbor's labor market status. If they are employed, there is an increase of your probability of being employed. But if you live in a neighborhood where everybody else are unemployed, your probability of being out of the labor market also increases. As I said before, you bring along work habits from your home country. And since the refugee immigration has been from countries with rather low labor force participation on women, they bring that norms also into the Swedish society. And another factor that is rather important to understand why women from abroad have lower employment rate is that unemployment and employment is contagious within and between generations. So if you live in a family where your parents are unemployed, the children seems to be unemployed in a higher degree. And if your friends are unemployed, you are unemployed to a higher degree. So this was about labor supply factors that can explain why foreign-born women work to a lesser extent than Swedish-born women. But there are also determinants from labor demand, where we think that employers look at the price of the workforce and also the risk of employing someone. And here we can see on the Swedish labor market that we have rather high entrance wages, and they are problematic for people with low or uncertain productivity. And if you come to Sweden with a rather low educational level or with very few hours on the labor market in your home country, it is rather difficult for the employer to figure out your productivity. We also can see from research that payroll taxes affect demand at the lower end of the income distribution. So high payroll taxes at the lower end of the income distribution could be a hinder for women from foreign countries to enter the labor market. It's also the case that we have a rather strict employment protection legislation in Sweden, and it protects weak insiders, but at the expense of weak outsiders. And weak outsiders in this sense are the less experienced workforce, such as immigrant or young people. And as I said before, foreign-born individuals are also discriminated on the labor market, usually statistically so. So to sum up my talk, I think progress is necessary to counteract polarization and contagious to the next generation. So it's not only about the mothers, it's also about their children. And as I've said so many times before, there is no simple solution or a one-size-fits-all. Work has to be done on all margins to increase both labor supply and labor demand. Thank you, Teresa, that I have to stop here.
Thank you so much, Susanne. And we will get back during our panel discussions with some questions in regards to the Swedish situation. But thank you so much. And I will now turn to France and to introduce our expert from France, Catherine Vitol de Venden. She's the Director of Research Emerita at CNRS, specialized in international migration as a political scientist. And she also teaches at Sciences Po in Paris. Welcome to this webinar, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I am very interested with the Swedish experience. I am not properly specialist of women on migration, but on migration, yes. And I shall take focus on women and access to the labor market, which is your purpose. I shall begin with some figures. Then I shall take your proposal, what has been done and what can be learned from the French experience. So in order to begin, excuse me not to have prepared a presentation because I am overloaded now with the PhD's presentations and courses. So I am very overloaded with work now. So I shall try to be very clear. In France, we have a long experience of migration because migration began since the second mid of the 19th century. And during quite one century until 1960s, most of migrants were men. And progressively, first, we saw the beginning of family reunification at the end of the 60s and 70s, and France decided to stop migration of labor force in 1974, and this accelerated family reunification because there was no more this possibility to come and to come back with the country of origin, because for non-Europeans, the border were progressively closed. So in the same time, we had a lot of migration from European countries, Italians for a long time, Polish, Spanish, and Portuguese. Portuguese are still the first nationality in France, and most of them arrived as illegals crossing the Pyrenean Mountains in the period of the so-called Trente Glorieuses, the period of economic growth. And so these women are mostly for the first and second generation belonging to the nationality, contrarily with Sweden, as I saw that most of these women were from refugee origin. In France, most of the women in migration are from the most important nationalities, Maghrebian, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, and now also more and more women from Eastern European countries like Romania, Poland, and so on. The figures first. In France, we are distinguishing the migrants, which is the foreign-born, and the foreigners, which are the non-nationals. So for the foreign-born, we have, according to the SOPEMI report, which is the OECD report about the perspective of migration, we have 8.2 million migrants, which is 12% of the population of migrants, and for the foreigners, 4.6 million foreigners, 6.8% of the population. We usually count with foreigners when we debate about migration in France. And as for the women, we have 51% women in this migration landscape. And on the labor market, we have 48.8% of foreign women in the labor market. We have also to take into account the second generation, which are mostly not considered as migrant, because in France the nationality code is rather open to those who were born in France, and so most of women are so disappearing of the figures because they became French, and it is we have no ethnic statistic. We have a big debate in France. We have had this debate for many years, and finally it has been decided now that we would not have ethnic statistic for various reasons. We can come back to that after. And so most of these women are also on the labor market. I could say, apart from these figures, that for unemployment, the rate of foreign women unemployed is 16%, which is higher than for men. For men, it is 14.9%. So, these women, there are a lot of specificities, but I could say they are not really specific politics. And in France, regarding to women migrants, we are perfectly in a model of intersectionality. They are considered as women first, and they are considered as from migrant origin or foreigners on the second point, but there is no specific politics for the labor market for migrant women. There are specificities for people living in inner cities, the so-called politique de la ville, so suburban population, I could say, but not especially foreigner or not, and not especially men or women. And there are also specific policies for the newcomers, men or women, with specific courses of languages. For example, those who get the refugee status are obliged to follow 400 hours of French language at least to be accepted, and in their integration per course, and for naturalization process, they are also obliged to follow these courses of languages, men and women. But there is one of the most important problems for the labor market is language, especially for the first generation women. If they are staying at home all the day, watching at the TV in their own language, the progress in French language is very low. But most of them, if we take the Maghrebians, the three nationalities, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia are the most important group as such, and so they are speaking French, and it can be also a plus for the labor market, like with a lot of sub-Saharan women from Western Africa. French language is also the official language. So the problem of language for a part of them is not the most important question. The second question is educative level. If they are in the first generation, most of them followed low school in their programs in their country of origin. So the second handicap is the level of education and the culture. For Maghrebian women, those from countryside are rather traditional in their minds, and the idea to be rapidly on the labor market not in their idea, and no more in the husband's idea. So these women from Maghreb are not so many on the labor market in the first generation. There are more turned towards the labor market in Western Africa because there is a tradition of women entrepreneurship and in trade, for example, for classes, in a lot of sending objects accompanying migration. We find these women, the African women, on the labor market, and for European women, we find most of them in care jobs, taking care of the old people, taking care of children, also the work at home for as various forms of domestics. This is for the first generation. For the second generation, most of them were following the French school. So, and most of them don't want to stay at home all the day. And so it is rather successful for the women, young women, compared with the young men. In the INED, Institute for Demographic Studies of France, we see that the success of migrant women or foreign women on the labor market is at school is better, but also is better for jobs because there is less discrimination against women than against men. The problem of the scarf can be, we have a lot of debates about the scarf. We have had a law in 2004 prohibiting more or less the scarf in schools, in public schools. But for most of them who don't have a scarf on the head, there are not so many discriminations on the labor market for women immigrants, but it is more difficult even for those educated, highly educated men on the labor market. So it is better. And this gap between girls and boys is not so high as the public opinion thinks in France, but it exists, and there are more possibilities to enter on the labor market. So nothing has been really done specifically for women migrants in France. There is no specific policy as migrants for them, but they are entering in the general frame of integration policies, town policies, educational policies. But for first generation women, most is done by associations, not by the state. So some of these associations are helped by the state, national or local level, but for example, courses of French, learning to write and to learn can be also these courses of so-called alphabetization for women, trying to put women out of their house in order to be more accustomed with life in the street, with public life too, if there are women at home. Also some training for future jobs is also done by associations in the urban policy, politique de la ville, and also some higher cultural education, to go out, to go to the movies and so on. Associations are doing a lot, even course of gymnastics, for example. And there is not so much specificity also between men and women, not specificity for migrants, not specificity between men and women, because especially for the second generation, they are entering in the general course of education, trying to fight against discrimination at the entrance on the labor market, and no specific policies except for the question of Me Too, the movement against sexual I cannot find the term aggression, for example, but it is not specific for them. There are also justice against prostitution, which is also a reality, especially among women from from Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, but it is not, it is a special file, I could say, and what could be learned from this French case, my last point, I could say that most of the most important, there are two most important points. First, the rapid, more or less rapid access to citizenship, which is a form of inclusion as future citizens in the country, because those who were born in France, if they have been living at least 5 years before their majority, have automatic access to French citizenship. They have to learn, to have courses of French if they are done speaking very well. And they have also courses of, I could say, citizenship, civic education, which can be a plus. Le contrat d'accueil et d'intégration, a contract for welcoming and integration, which is not specific to women, but There are also women in this file course. The second point is, and for those from Algerian origin, there is a specific law because Algeria was France, and if they were born in France from parents born in France, which is Algeria, before 1963, they become French on the day of their birth on the French territory. So access to citizenship can be a plus to facilitate some jobs where it is required to be French or to be European, for example, in hospitals, in public services. And we find most of them in these jobs because there are, it is stability on the labor market. There are some exceptions, women in culture and so on, but I don't speak of these exceptional women. I am speaking on the medium size of success of these women. The second point is the activity, the local activities partly made between towns and associations. And if we are seeing what has been done at the ground level for these women in inner cities, many actions are turned towards women with specific focuses on their difficulties, mostly acquiring a qualification, learning to drive a car, having the habit to go out of their house, trying to give them a job in order to enter in the labor market. And so these local policies are also important. No specific action for women refugees. They are entering in the normal courses of refugees. One of the problems is the legal dependency of these women towards the status of their husband. Most of the entrance, the legal entrances in France, because we are an old migration country, is linked with family reunification. So first, the reason of legal entrance is family reunification, which is quite more than 40% of the entrances. After we have the refugee possibility, and then we have the qualified students, for example. Family reunification, like in the US, because it is also an old migration country, is the first factor of legal migration. And most of these women have entered as women of workers in the past and still now, even as refugees. And so they are very strongly dependent on the status of their husband. If their husband is illegal, they have difficulties to acquire legalization, for example. In some cases, it is for all the family, but in other cases, just for the man, or for the refugee status. In most cases, it is for all the family, but if they arrive separately, it can be separate for the status. And if the husband decides to leave its family, women and children, these women are alone. And one of the most important social problems for these women are women from immigrant origin and also foreigners alone, sometimes becoming illegal due to the departure of their husband, if they have been abandoned, for example, and married according to the traditional religious rite. And so they are alone with children. And in the social centers for welcoming women. We welcome a lot of women immigrants alone with few capacities on the labor market, having to take care of young children and without resources. There is no specific, except for associations, but at the state level, no specific action for these women. They are with other French women, for example, but there are many in these centers, also in the centers for care of children, la PMI, protection for medical assistance to young children. We find a lot of these women because it is free of charge, and there are advices which are given to them to take care of their young children. But in all these social focused institutions, we have many chances to find these women which will have difficulties to enter in the labor market. So perhaps the non-specific approach can be a plus because there is no accent which is put on their foreign status nor on their women status, but on the other side, it is a general policy which is not so dedicated particularly to women immigrants. I shall stop here.
Thank you so much for your presentation, very informative. And we will move on immediately and wait for the questions until the end. And we will now turn to Germany and to Dr. Carola Böckert. Carola has been working as a senior researcher at the Institute of Employment Research in Germany since 2005. And she has also worked at the German Federal Agency for Recognition of Foreign Refugees, was a researcher of the Council of Experts on Immigration and Integration, and also a member of the Commission Perspectives for a Future-Oriented and Sustainable Refugee Policy and Immigration Policy. I had to read that out, of Heinrich Böll Foundation in Germany. Welcome, Dr. Böckert.
Hello, welcome. Thank you very much for the friendly introduction and for all the support I get from before the seminar, Therese and David, and also from the German embassy. Unfortunately, I'm sitting in my hometown in the south of Germany instead of beautiful Stockholm. I've never been there and I hope I will get another chance to go there. Well, I would like to talk about migrant women in the German labor market, the current situation and the challenges. And my presentation has three parts. I would like to start with the general conditions about integration and labor market. Then my second part is about indicators of labor market integration. And then I will conclude and tell you the challenges. Well, migrant in the German labor market. First, let me ask, why should we discuss this topic? Firstly, from a labor market perspective, there is also in COVID times, there is a demand for skilled labors due to the demographic change. And it's much better to have a successful integration instead of wasting potentials. And secondly, the perspective of female migrants and their participation in the labor market. Well, within the participation in the labor market, you will have a sufficient income, which enables you to have an independent life planning instead of being an aid recipient. And Susan mentioned it before, you can be, if you would like to be, you can be a role model for your daughters and your sons. And I will have to do two remarks. My first remark is, please bear in mind all the time when we talk about migrant women, immigration and integration often take place in a family context. We talk about individual statistics, we talk about the woman in the labor market, but please bear in mind that there is a family context. And secondly, my second remark is, I don't know if I translated it the right way. We talk about woman. we talk about migrant. And we also have to bear in mind all the time that there is a heterogeneity, that there is no the migrant woman, like that there is no the German woman or the Swedish woman. Yes, and yeah, there are different countries of origin and different migration experiences. We talk about the second generation and the third generation, and the channel of migration. Do they come as labor migrants, like a lot of women within the EU enlargement, or they are asylum seekers, or do they come from family unification or for study reasons? And Susan mentioned all before it, the level of qualification, what do they bring with, and the education system from their country of origin, and of course the number and the age of children. And I would show you how important migrants are for the German labor market. It's indispensable, the contribution of migrants to employment growth in Germany. What you see is the growth in employment from 2014 to 2019. We had 3.2 million new jobs. Half of the is caused by men, 54%, and 46% by women. But now, let me split this in the non-German and the German. Within the group of migrant, it can be seen that two-thirds is caused by men and 1/3 by women. Among the Germans, the figure is 50% each. So there are differences between German and non-Germans, but we should bear in mind the contribution of migrants to the employment growth in Germany. Now I would come to my second part, the labor market integration. And I would like to talk about my first part, integration is making progress. And then I would like to focus on what happened since March. The COVID-19 pandemic stopped the positive trend. I would like to start with the group of refugees. And what you see is the employment rate of refugees after X years since arrival in Germany. And what you see immediately, there is an increase. There's a progress in integration. After 5 years, nearly 50% of the refugees are employed. But our topic today are men and women, and I split it therefore. What you see now, the line above, the light blue one, is the employment rate of male refugees after X years since arrival in Germany. And you see after 2 years, 25%, and after 5 years, 50–70% of the male refugees are employed, quite above the average. And you know already what that means for female refugees. You see the line now, it's the maybe yellow line. And there's also a progress in integration for refugee women, but there is a clear gender gap. After 5 years, 57% of male, but only 29% of female refugees are employed. A clear gender gap. And now I will focus on some more labor market indicators, like when we talk about occupation and migrant women, and occupations tell you something about stability and the wages. Occupation and migrant women. Migrant women are overrepresented in occupations in the food industry, tourism, occupation in cleaning services, and now I can't read this, and occupation in construction and logistic professions. And they are underrepresented in management professions and IT. And you know, the wages in these occupations. The second indicator, okay, no, sorry, I forgot that. And in March, we had a lockdown, a really strong lockdown in Germany due to COVID, and all the shops closed, hotels closed, restaurants closed, and also school closed, yes. And what I can tell you is some of those occupations are most affected by the pandemic, which means migrants and also migrant women are hit by the pandemic. I would like now focus on the economic sectors and migrant women, and it's equal to occupations. Well, migrant women concentrates in specific sectors of the economy. I mean, always compared to German, like other service activities, cleaning services, temporary work, or accommodation and food services. Those are those sectors where the entrance barriers are quite low. Maybe you don't need that language skills, you don't need a lot of qualification, but at least you can work. And as I mentioned it before, those are those sectors most affected by the pandemic. And thirdly, the job profile and migrant women. When I talk about job profile, I mean on what job profile they work, on what kind of tasks, unskilled or skilled. It doesn't mean that they have the formal qualification. Maybe they work at an unskilled task level, but they have a higher qualification. But due to reasons we can discuss later on, they cannot work on their formal qualification. Well, what we see is that migrant women have a higher proportion with unskilled tasks, but also a small proportion of highly complex tasks. Just to give you an example, the job profile of unskilled tasks. German women, 40% of the German women works at the level of unskilled tasks. Migrant women, 41%, and women from Romania and Bulgaria, which is a big migrant group in Germany, nearly 2/3 of them work at an unskilled level. And as you know, those task levels are most affected by the pandemic. And I spoke now about 3 indicators, and now I show you a result of these 3 indicators: migrant women and wages. Migrant women are more often in the low wage sectors than German with the same job profile, but there are differences between the migrant group. When I talk about the low wage sector, I speak about, according to OECD standards, you are earning maximum gross income is in full-time, don't dream, 2,267 euros. Yes, and I would give you an example. Well, German women who work at an unskilled level, unskilled task in their job, half of them earn the maximum of the low wage sectors, 2,200 and something, or maybe less. And then look at the share of the other groups. Other countries except Germany, 3/4, and look at Bulgaria and Romania. So the shares are always higher. I mean, this is a result of all the indicators. And remember what I mentioned at the beginning, the labor market participation should enable you to have a sufficient income, not in a pattern like this. And the patterns remain the same, the higher the tasks, also with skilled tasks and highly complex tasks. And the patterns are the same with men, but at a lower level. And I would like to talk about self-employed migrant women. And there is an increase, 35% of all self-employed migrants are women. And this is a small increase in the last years, as you can see it from the picture. And now I would like to conclude. And to mention what we can learn, I would like to speak about 2 projects. My first example is the left one. It's called Proactive Advising in Social Media for female migrants from non-European countries. And the target group are female migrants from non-European countries. And there is a proactive advice. And you see there the different points. And I would like to, the first and orientative advising, correcting false information, sharing subsequent relevant information before their arrival, before they come to Germany. And well, how does it work? The access to the job markets. And the second example I would like to give, we call it Strong in the Workplace, Stark im Beruf, Mütter mit Migrationshintergrund. And the aim is to improve labor market access for female migrants with children. And you see they are cooperating with partners to ensure family-friendly professional integration. So the entry into the job labor market, I would like to conclude now. The success factors, proven approaches and proven methods, you know it already. And it's the word, the reconciling family and work. Well, we have to take care about what are the childcare options. And we always have to bear in mind that the employment of the woman, of the mother in the households, lead to changes for all family members. And then another success factors we have to, the working environment, we have to do to improve labor services like professional orientation, to have the possibilities to have internship and training, to qualify and the recognition of foreign qualification, and to have sufficient German language skills. And what is really important is the knowledge of the German labor market. How do I have to look for a job? How does it work, the job search procedure? How do I have to applicate? What I have to do in an interview? And let me finish. Things in terms of potential, not in deficits. What potentials do people bring? And what we have to do is to reach target groups better, especially the companies, because the companies give work to the people, and we have to reach those target group better. Yes. Thank you for listening and for your time, and thank you, Therese.
Therese, hi. I'm sorry, Therese, I cannot hear you.
Probably, yeah, now you can probably hear me. There's some problems with the mic. Sorry, I will start again.
Thank you.
Well, we will shift a bit in our perspective, and I want to welcome Sophia Altafi. Thank you, Sophia, also for reminding me to put the mic on. That usually helps when you want to address the audience. Sophia is the founder and the chairman for the foundation Esther. It's an organization that helps to support migrant women entrepreneurs to start their own company. And she also has a PhD from Stockholm School of Economics. And Sophia was also one of the authors and contributors to a book that was launched by Fores this June. It's called Framtidens chefer. Unfortunately, it's only in Swedish, where we also look at the possibility for migrant entrepreneurs here in Sweden. And that can be found also on Fores' webpage. Thank you so much, Sophia, for participating. And I would love to hear about your work also in regards to entrepreneurship and migrant women. Please.
Thank you very much, Therese. Let me just share the screen here. There. Thank you, Therese and Fores. Esther Foundation is very happy to be associated with you, and thank you for all the support and for giving us the opportunity to take part in this event. It's been very interesting to listen to, of course, Susanne's depiction of the Swedish situation, which she tells in a macro level and we relate to on a micro level. But also listening to the French and the German experience is very interesting. And I think we have a lot to learn from each other. So I'm the president and co-founder of Esther Foundation. We are a not-for-profit charitable foundation. We started about a decade ago. Our aim is to support immigrant women with job and entrepreneurial training, and our goal is for them to become financially independent. We offer a holistic training in entrepreneurship, and our target group consists of unemployed immigrant women who are currently living on either social welfare or they're dependent on a relative. And just like the previous speaker, we've seen that women and mothers are agents for change, and not just for themselves, but for their family and for their local community. And we also see that in this, the women that have come to Sweden during the last decades, they have a lot of experiences and they have a lot of knowledge that all of society can benefit from. So what we've done is we've used principles from the microfinance sector in countries like India and Bangladesh and Pakistan, and we've tried to translate them into a Swedish welfare context. And our foundation is small, and it's driven by some souls that really are passionate for this cause. I'm very happy to say that in 2016, we became an EU reference project because our pilot project in the south of Sweden was very successful, and 80% of the participants started businesses and became financially independent. So Esther Foundation agrees that economic integration of immigrants is one of the biggest challenges of our time in Europe and in Sweden. So our approach is built on 3 forms of capital that we provide to our participants. Human capital, social capital, and financial capital. Human capital means training in personal leadership, in health and lifestyle, in the Swedish job market, but mainly in business and entrepreneurship. So how do you make your own business plan? How do you market and to bring your product to the market? How do you find your first customer? We also believe that our target group lacks social capital in Sweden. They don't have the networks and access to the arenas that you need to have as an entrepreneur to find customers, to market yourself. And finally, financial capital, what is known as microfinances, startup loans for entrepreneurs, but to good prices, interest rates that are affordable and reasonable. We work with small groups of women, maximum 12 women per group. We've learned that offering a flexible schedule is really important because people have different agendas, life agendas. So people can work part-time and still take part of our program, or study part-time. Since the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, we started taking our program online. And since March, we've developed and also tested a completely virtual entrepreneurship program. We mix classroom teaching with, we visit everything from tax authorities to banks to running companies, and we do individual coaching and a lot of giving access to new networks. After the 4-month program, we offer a mentor group that can provide support to the newly started businesses for about half a year to up to 1 year. So basically a very holistic approach, a very long-term approach. And also, even if it's delivered through groups, a very individualized approach. So these are some of the groups that we've had in the Stockholm region. And the lessons that we've learned so far, we've now been doing this for about 9 years, and it's gone up and down. But one thing that we've really been able to conclude is that women really are important for local communities and for society at large. And we've seen that when we give our participants the keys to the right doors, they become like bridges for the whole family. When they find out about where the good schools are, what residential areas are available for them to live in, when they know about internships for their children, they do everything they can to help not just themselves, but their whole family, and not just their family, but actually the whole community around them. So yeah, we really see a lot of potential in women. And like the Carola, my previous speaker, said, our target group, immigrant women, for sure is a very heterogeneous group of people. And our results and after some time, also our programs have varied a lot depending on the group composition. So, for example, we had a group in a very poor area outside of Stockholm called Järva, with high unemployment and low educational level and high poverty levels. And in that group, our most important task was to just take the participants one step closer to the labor market and bring their confidence back. So this resulted in internships, one woman starting to study, getting her study plan ready, and in general, just vibrating up the energy of the women so that they felt more confident about their lives and about the lives of their children. The last 6 months, we've been running the virtual entrepreneurship program, and we've recruited broadly from all over the Stockholm metropolitan area. And we've found more entrepreneurial women, women with higher educational backgrounds, women with prior experience from entrepreneurship. And in this group of 10 women, 5 already are in the process of registering their companies. So the results are really dependent on the level where you start. Another thing that we've concluded after all these years is that our initial decision to focus on women-only groups has really, we think, been a good choice, because a lot of the women that come to us are indirectly excluded from more mainstream support structures. They're not necessarily, they don't go to the mainstream organizations, and there are not that many of them in Sweden, but this group of people generally don't find their way there. And when they come to STED, the barriers are very low. They feel very safe and secure with other women, and they build trust within their group and towards the STED's teachers and consultants very fast. And trust is key here, I think. STED, our foundation, has also had physical offices in the areas where we've recruited women when we've worked with specific areas. For example, Järva, we had an office in Järva. And another conclusion, apart from working with women-only groups, is that we've really seen the importance of holistic and long-term commitment. We still have women who contact us after 6 years of going through our program, and they still need our support and our help in their business life and in their personal life. So we built a kind of small Esther network where all the participants that have gone through our trainings feel that they can come back to Esther and get support and solidarity from other women and other entrepreneurs. So these are some of the examples of businesses that our women have started. For example, a catering service. One lady started where she would go home to people's homes and cook for them. Another example is a lady who started a vintage. She bought vintage products like coffee and tea cups and from Scandinavian designers, and then she sold them in China. Another example that is very recent is a food truck business with gluten-free teff products from Eritrea. Teff is a gluten-free a product from Eritrea. And another example is a woman setting up an accounting company where she focuses on other small entrepreneurs. But of course, these are really great examples of small companies that have been set up. But a lot of our work is also on not just entrepreneurial side, but on the social side. So a lot of women that come to us after or during the course of the program, we realize and they realize that they were not cut out for being an entrepreneur in a Swedish context. So we do our best to find employment, internships, identify study plans for them so that they will be in a different position when they leave Ester compared to when they started. So for example, one woman got an employment at ICA Maxi in there where they cook their ready-made food. We organized an internship for a woman in a tailor shop. We opened up a formalized network among women in Stockholm that led to a full-time employment at Grand Hotel for another woman. So these are examples of how we've supported individual women in gaining access to the Swedish labor market. But we also spend a lot of time on general support for women who are going through difficult times in their life, like we all are at one point in our lives. For example, divorce, health issues, physical or mental abuse, children being bullied at school. In this sense, we spend a lot of time supporting our existing and former participants in their going through life matters. During these years, we've also had to face a lot of challenges. And many of them we've just been fighting in vain, we've seen now after 9-10 years of working. And we've spent so much time and energy fighting structures in the Swedish system that today we just accept that they're there and we don't even try to change the structures because they to us they seem unchangeable. One aspect that has been difficult for us to handle is that since we're a very small NGO, we are not publicly, we're not part of the public bidding process. We're not procured through that process. And this means that our participants don't have access to any state benefits when they go follow our program. So they need to really be motivated if they want to put so many hours per week into our program, and they need to have their income from other sources, like work part-time or have savings or find individual solutions with their local unemployment office. Another problem that we've faced is something called start your own company allowance in Sweden. In Swedish, it's called starta eget bidrag. It's a support that the Swedish government gives to newly started businesses. And for people who lack prior work experience in Sweden, who are not part of the system or who have lived on social welfare, they would get the minimum level. And once they register their business, also if they have been receiving housing allowance, this would end once they register their business. So just like Susanna explained in the beginning of our seminar, the effects of starting your own business compared to living on welfare is a lot of the time even negative. So you would work very hard with your new business and you would still not be able to gain as much money as you had from the social welfare system. Another problem that especially I think women self-employed or micro-entrepreneur entrepreneurs as women face in Sweden is the social security system, which in terms of parental leave and sick leave. And our system is very generous and very comprehensive, but it's still made for employment in big companies. It's still been designed for this type of work, while self-employed people contribute to the system, but they're not able to utilize it in a very large extent. And then there's the area of bank loans, which in Sweden there is very limited access for small entrepreneurs who lack a relationship to a bank and who doesn't have the traditional collateral. And then finally, the taxation system in Sweden that treats micro or self-employed people almost the same as they treat large companies like Ericsson and ABB, both from an income taxation perspective and from a company taxation perspective. So this means that to be a small company, perhaps with offering unskilled services, you need to work a lot to be able to live off your company. And so these are just a few of the structural challenges that we as a foundation have faced during these last years. But on an individual level, we've had challenges with especially newly arrived immigrant ladies who have poor language skills. We've considered offering our program in other languages and complementing with Swedish to enhance their learning of the Swedish language as well. But so far we've not come there yet. Also, we've seen clearly that low level of education among our participants is a big obstacle to succeeding in Sweden. And then health issues is another thing that gets in the way of the entrepreneurial journey. A lot of our participants have dropped out or not been able to start up their companies because of health issues. So thank you very much. And Therese, I know that you may have some questions for me. I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And I'm, as always, in awe of the way you present it, although I will not agree that it's not possible to change structural hindrances. I will never give up in trying to improve at a political level. And I hope the people watching that have that possibility and to change the system so that it's easier to get self-employed also for migrant women. You mentioned that it's hard for women to get access, indirectly hard for women to get access to more generalized programs, and that you have found that it's been a good choice to direct it more towards women only. Could you elaborate a little bit about that? Because I know that it's an issue.
Well, first, the Arbetsförmedlingen, the Swedish Public Employment Service, is our experience is that they don't really acknowledge our target group as being fit for starting up businesses. So it's not something that they encourage our target group to do. In Sweden, mostly our target group is encouraged to work in elderly homes or in some kind of hospital or care environment as undersköterska, as a care provider. And many of the women that come to us are not interested in this. I mean, the women that come to us are interested in, many of them are interested in setting up their own business. And there are some apart from the government initiatives, there are civil society initiatives that also offer individualized coaching and support for new entrepreneurs. But for some reason, many of the women that come to us, they've never been to these mainstream organizations, and they're a little bit too far from their level. They need to be prepared a little bit. Maybe after they've been going through our programs, they're more prepared, and they could actually go on to the mainstream. I call them mainstream, but large established organizations, and know how to speak for themselves, know what to expect from the organization and what the organization expects from them. But in the stage that they are in when they come to us, they're not prepared, and those organizations don't actively embrace our target group either. They don't actively seek these women. No one does in Sweden.
So it's a matter of feeling welcomed in combination with their own self-confidence, and that has to be focused on for them to get into the more mainstream, if we call them that.
Yes.
Okay. And hearing from you, you will not participate in our final discussion. That's why I want to also ask you a few questions. Hearing from the other experts, you mentioned some of it in your presentation. Is there anything in particular that caught your interest and that you would like to highlight?
Well, first of all, I think Susanne's presentation, because I'm familiar with the Swedish context, I think I was like, wow, when she presented, because she presented on a statistical level, but she presented what we experienced and what we've concluded over these years. 100%, I couldn't agree more with her conclusions from her research. What I was curious about was actually the German situation, because I think Germany and Sweden are more historically more easily comparable than Sweden and France. And Carola mentioned something about an initiative where the women with children were in focus. And I was particularly interested to learn more about that initiative, if it's a government initiative, and what the results have been, and in general, learn more about this, because we really see from Esther's perspective, we don't understand how we can miss this group of people that are so important for children, for families, and for husbands as well, but for the whole immigrant community where they're from. The women are central, and still we just, we don't even single them out as special.
Okay. Thank you, and I will make sure to ask these questions. Thank you so much, Sofia, for both your presentation and your hard work. And on that note, I will also welcome now two experts from the Swedish Public Employment Center that we just touched upon. It's Josephine Palmqvist-Schultz and Petra Ornstein. Josephine, you are the project manager of the project called Equal Rights, if we translate it into English. And Petra is the researcher of the same project. And speaking of this group and of your agency, I'm very glad to have you here and to hear what has been done in your project and what your findings are so far. I know it's a project that still is ongoing, so you're in the middle of your work right now. But thank you for coming, and please.
Thank you so much, Therese, and thank you for having us. Me and Petra, we're delighted to be here, and we're going to share with you a few other backgrounds to what we're doing and how we're doing it and what our results are. So Petra is going to present our slide, and as Therese mentioned, I'm the project manager for this project that we've named Equal Entry in English, and Petra is the lead researcher. So let's see if we can have the slides. There we go. Perfect. So Equal Entry, what are we? Well, we're a project run by the Swedish Public Employment Service, and we're co-founded by the European Social Fund. So we can change the slide, Petra, please.
I'm trying.
There you go. So We're both a labor market integration project, and we're designed as a randomized controlled trial, which is quite special. And we're actually based on the Swedish Public Employment Services National Action Plan to increase the employment rate of foreign-born women. Extremely exciting and interesting and important topic. So we're quite a big project. We're a national project, and we have a budget of around 30 million euros, somewhere around that. That makes us the largest project that is run currently by us, the Swedish Public Employment Service. We act very data-driven, and we do that in order to be sure that we can actually prioritize job seekers who are really far from the labor market. Our target group is newly arrived immigrants with a refugee background, and they've had their residence permits for no longer than 4 years. We have locations at 16 different locations throughout Sweden, and they vary from the big cities, Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö, to medium-sized cities and smaller cities, because we want to make sure that we have the different sets of labor markets where we work. We're around 130 caseworkers. 110 of them are working locally with the teams, and around 20 are supporting and steering the project from a central point of view. Our scope is around 3,000 participants in an active labor market policy, and of those we have at least 50% women. So Petra, I will now leave the mic to you so that you can give a background.
Right. So this is just one background slide, but I think Susanne Akjum's presentation gives a lot of the same background that has been the basis of why we're doing what we're doing. So you saw from her presentation that we have differences in employment level across both gender and the country of birth, and that there is a large gap between Swedish-born men and foreign-born women. But we can also see that when we look at similar prerequisites, we control for factors such as labor market experience in the home country and education level. Foreign-born women have a lower employment rate than foreign-born men. And we also see that they have an inferior support, or they get job search assistance or intensive coaching to a lower degree than foreign-born men. And they are seen to be job ready to a lower extent. And we know that these job search assistance and subsidized jobs, they work to get people into the job market. So this is something that we can manipulate. The support you get from the Swedish Public Employment Service, and this is the intervention that the project is built around. And another background is that this has been an assignment from the government to the Public Employment Service. So this is a randomized controlled trial. We asked our target group if they want to be part of a study, and for those that say yes, we randomize whether we offer them to take part in the program or whether they or whether they are offered the ordinary support through the Public Employment Service. So that means that we can interpret outcome differences as the contribution of the offer to take part in the project. And as Carola Burkett showed in her presentation, when you look at employment levels over time since entering a new country, they rise over time. And at the beginning, our group has at maximum 4 years of residence permit. So over time, their employment level increases in both intervention group and control group. But after 15 months, when we look, we see that 40% of the intervention group are in employment, whereas 30% of the control group. And that means that we have a 10 percentage point difference. So somewhere between 5 and 15 percentage point difference, that's what we can say with more certainty. And we can also say that that is a result of being offered to take part in projects. Since we are especially interested in women, we have looked at the heterogeneity of this as well. What are the effects for the women in our target group, and it's on the same level.
Thank you so much, Petra. So what are we actually doing in this project, and how are we doing it? Well, we have a process where we start with a systematic, inclusive, and guiding mapping of every job seeker that we interact with. So this systematic mapping involves around the formal competences and the informal competences, because as we've heard before, these women, they lack formal criteria. So we need to look at other aspects in order to include them and make them enter the labor market. And so that is the first step of our process. And the second step is to do basically the same thing with each and every prospect company that we want to work with. So we map the employer in an insightful way so that they are actually able to look beyond the formal criteria, and so that they can actually focus on what is actually needed to do the job. So this creates a possibility to match individuals who are lacking the formal work credentials to a business or a corporation who is insightful and who actually knows what's going on and who are confident enough to take on this target group. And throughout this process, we put focus on guidance and passing on knowledge, because we want to make sure that both the employee and the employer know what they're doing in order to create a sustainable match. So you'll see a green picture on this slide, and that is actually our current top 3 branches or sectors. And it has been mentioned before that these women often take positions giving care to elderly, etc. And we're no different. But there is one thing that is very important to us, and that is that we focus on the desired job. Where do these women want to work? Because we want to make sure that there is a sustainable match. And in order to achieve that, we need to be very coherent and listen to what the women are saying. So we've seen a switch after the pandemic. The restaurant sector and the tourism sector, they've been almost dead in Sweden, unfortunately. And we've seen a rise in the service sector. So for example, a nurse's aide assistant, etc. I think we can switch the slide, Petra. So what you're seeing now is what the actual mapping of a person looks like. And in order to achieve this, we have 2 caseworkers. One is standing in front of the whiteboard with a pen and the job-seeking person. And one is actually typing down these aspects into the computer form. So we can switch the slide to the next one, please, Petra, and see what it actually looks like in the next step. So you'll see the headlines are the formal competences, the informal competences, the personal characteristics, desired work, goal, etc. So you will also see there's a sun, and there's the person's name in the middle of the sun. And the dotted lines from the sun are actually personal characteristics, which has been put in front during the mapping of the person. So Sabiba, she's seen as curious, patient, confident, friendly, etc. And so what we're doing is that we're guiding the person, we're opening up the doors, we're widening the horizons on how to look at the labor market, and we're posing questions to have this mapping, which is then translated into an Excel file, which is then the basis for the team's work. Yes, I think we can summarize.
To summarize what Josephine said, we are a matching project. We enable unemployed, newly arrived immigrants and employers to find each other through a systematic mapping of the job seeker a corresponding mapping of the employer, a support throughout the match, and a support post the match to ensure that this is a good match and a sustainable match. And this is all we do. It is not an activation project. We do not put extra control. We do not assess whether the individual is job ready. Overall, we see that job search assistance it seems to work best. So to be a cost-effective intervention, we do only this. And another way to try to generalize what Josephine said, we can think of this intervention as a gender mainstream job search assistance. We construct an intervention out of the needs of the immigrant women group, where, for example, we ensure that the systematic mapping covers informal competencies because they have typically had a lifetime of working, but maybe not in a formal sector. And they have skills, but maybe not formal qualifications. And we make sure to check flexibility so that they can take steps further closer to the labor market, even though they might have a lot of responsibility for their families. We also have to choose women. We have to make sure that we select women into the program and that we ask them to take part in a way so that they are able to say yes. Because typically we see that women are not part of these types of interventions. And we need to support the staff who work on this to focus on consequences and to focus on the consequences for the women, so that we set up goals for gender equal outcomes out to following the whole way out to work. And we remind all of us, and both in the public employment service in general, managers on all levels, and ourselves who are part of the central team, and the case workers who work with the job seekers about those goals. And by communicating sex segregated results to the local teams in a way so that they can set local goals. And this helps them to keep the intervention to the needs of a women target group, and to make sure that they choose women and ask them in a way so that they can say yes. And so far, we have offered support to 3,500 job seekers and asked them whether they want to take part of the intervention. And more than 90% say yes, they want to work when they are asked in a way that is easy to accept for them. And we see, as previous speakers have emphasized, that the target group is very heterogeneous. We do have individuals with very high formal qualifications, but half of our group lacks secondary school education. And a bit over half are women, which also shows that we are able to communicate how important the women female group is to our project, to our caseworkers who are able to select them. And so far, 2,500 job seekers have participated in the systematic mapping. And as an overall result, we can see that for those who did that at least 3 months ago, so that we have had some time to work together with them, 43% have reached employment. And the result for women is just a little bit lower on 40%. And I leave to you, Josephine.
Thank you, Petra. So to sum our results up, we're doing really well. A lot of our participants are far from the labor market, and they still express a desire to receive support in order to enter the labor market, and they manage to get employed within a short period of time to a reasonable cost. And we're not actively bringing that up in this presentations, but the costs are fair and reasonable if in comparison to other JSA programs that we do at the governmental level. So let's switch to the next slide, because this is our overall message. Immigrant women are much needed at the labor market, and we have to actively make it happen. And our project is one of the steps along that way. So thank you so much for listening to us.
Thank you so much to both of you and for presenting the project Equal Entry and nothing else. I think I said equal rights in the beginning, but it's equal entry. That's the translation of your product. And it's interesting to hear that although you still are in the middle of your project, you already can see such good results. And I also thank you, Petra, for joining us especially. We will now go into the panel, and I know that Josephine will represent you in this panel. So thank you, Petra.
Thank you very much.
And let's go to our joint panel and make sure that we have all the experts with us again. Catherine and Susanne as well. Welcome back. Catherine, are you with us as well? If you could turn on your camera, please.
Yes.
Perfect. Yes. Now I see all of you again. Thank you so much. What a lot of information has been shared throughout. Thank you so much to all of you. I would like to start with the most obvious questions. So I will turn to you, Susanne. From having your first presentation and now have listened to the other experts, is there anything that you found especially interesting and would like to highlight as a comparison, as best practice?
Maybe I'm further convinced that thorough work by caseworkers gives results. What do I mean by that? I think I mean that realize that there is no one size fits all measure. It's extremely important. You really have to look at the individual and to map out his explicit or implicit competences. You also have to know about the labor market and the desire of the employers. I think that's extremely important. That will increase the probability of a good match. But then it comes also to, usually this is much more expensive than sort of having these one size fits all measures. So you have to work through your cost benefit analysis to be able to say to the government that this should be explored in sort of more general measures. But if you realize when you are calculating your cost benefit analysis, I think we have said that women actually are drivers of change. And I think it's especially true for the next generation. So this cost benefit analysis has to include women as parents. So I think what we have been presented from our employment offers, Esther, sort of specific what was going on in Germany, because I think that perhaps Germany is a little bit more comparable to the situation in Sweden, because as Catherine said, you have had much more of a heterogeneous labor market for a long time. So in that sense, you are better off than we are. Well, thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the joint conclusions from all of you is the need for independence of the women in order to not only gain access to the labor market but also to take it, to take the benefits that would lead to. You talked about everything from legal independence, as you mentioned, Catherine. Many came from family reunification, and actually they can only stay in the country if they are still together with that husband. But there's also a need for more like learning to drive, gaining out in the society in a more social aspect. Although you are better off, Catherine, in France, having a different migrant population. You mentioned that there were no measurements or policies directly towards women. Do you find that there's no need for it to have that in France, or is it something that you would benefit as well, as have been explained by?
Thank you for this question. No, most of the policy towards women is led or by social public services or by local associations. And as I said, most is made by local associations, partly with benevolent women, sometimes from immigration origin. Some others are coming from activism. Migrant women are very engaged in various forms of activism, political activism, against sex discrimination and so on. And for most of them, the step was first to be active in these associations between having a more important place in the society. So we have to take into account for this aspect, which involves mainly the second generation, but sometimes also the first generation women. So there is no real specific policy except for the Minister of Women, but no specificity. I shall say that there are some perhaps specific aspects from refugee women. I led some time ago a field study on refugee women, and there is a lot of dequalification because some of them are rather qualified, being professor, school teachers, and so on, or doctors, but there is no recognition of their diploma. The same for Syrian women. A lot of them were in the labor market in their country, but they have a poor qualification in France due to problems possibly of language and also problems of diploma. And in the past, the job for refugees was not a real problem because most refugees were male intellectuals from Eastern European countries or from Southern countries. So it was not a real thing. So it is another problem. And some other women are taking the knowledge of French language are as a plus. For example, the men from Western Africa are proposing their services are care women for children or for old people or as nurses, comparatively with Chinese women, with other nationalities who don't practice very good French. So there are specificities.
Thank you. And in that area, so I would like to ask you, Josephine, the validation of diplomas in combination with language skills. How are you working with that, Josephine, as a state agency in your project? Because I know that is also an issue in Sweden, especially the validation of diplomas.
Yeah, that's true. It has been an issue for quite a long time, and I think we've grown accustomed to it, and we've became better at dealing with it, and we've implemented some what we call fast tracks. For example, when we have skilled workers who need to get their diplomas validated as quickly as possible, because we also have a segregated labor market and we have wide gaps to fill. And so I think we've improved the recent years, and in equal entry, it's one of the things that comes up when we're doing the mapping of the person, because we're discussing the entity of the person. So if you have a skilled profession, then we need to look into it and see, can you take small steps along the way? For example, if you're a nurse from your country, can you start as a nurse's aide and then gradually take your small steps in order to achieve your goal, for example?
And I would suspect it's also a matter of working with the employers to also recognize the competences, although maybe the diploma is from another country.
Absolutely.
How are you working with that? I know you're also working on the other part, not only with the women but also with the employers. How is that going?
Well, as you've seen, the results is going quite well.
Yeah.
Well, it all comes down to you need to guide the employers. They need to be made aware that the person standing in front of them is actually going to be able to perform the job. Whenever they feel assured of that, they will hire the person. So, for example, one way to achieve that is to start with a short trainee period, so that they can actually validate themselves to see if a person can perform the job. And we get signs every day of this, how this works. For example, just before the seminar, I got an email from one of the caseworkers who said that they received an email from Staples headquarters, a big company, who have been able to look beyond the former criteria and employ 2 people for a job without subsidies. So it works, but you need to have an open dialogue.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. And we also mentioned, almost all of you, I think, also mentioned that social benefits or benefits of different kinds can actually work against women getting into the labor market, and that it is not always beneficial for a woman to go out into the labor market compared to what she can benefit from staying at home. Dr. Burkert, would you like to address also the question that Sophia said about the initiative with women and children, because that's part of it, of course.
Yeah, maybe let me start with the program I mentioned before, and which I really do like. We call it Strong in the Workplace. Mütter mit Migrationshintergrund, mother with migration background, stark im Beruf. And well, the aim is to improve labor market access for female migrants with children. And it is financed by the European Social Fund. And in the first period, let me see it, 2015 to 2018, 80 projects were founded. And in the new period, 2019 to 2022, 90 projects are founded. And responsible is the Federal Ministry for Family Affairs. And the projects are all over Germany, yes, with different approaches. And sometimes it's a migration organization who has an idea for a project. And it's always the cooperating with partners to ensure family-friendly professional integration. And well, the aim is that migrants' mother wish to take up gainful employment, and the projects would like to support them in doing so. And the cooperation, and what we mentioned all before the last 1.5 hours, the cooperation is with the employment agency, with the Federal Employment Agency, with local and community services, and what Josephine mentioned before, the companies. They're so important because you have to reduce the uncertainty of company if they hire someone. And I just looked for the numbers. This was really impressive, the project. I mean, by now, 12,000 mothers have participated on the program, and more than a third have taken up a job liable to social insurances or are self-employed. And at least 65% have acquired a focus on the attaining gainful employment, because it's a long way. And as Josephine mentioned it before, let's start now. It's a long way, and sometimes you fall back and there are success. And the lessons learned from the program Stark im Beruf, Strong in the Workplace, Stark im Beruf, is 3. The first one is to integration supports. You have to support immediately after immigration, because it was also mentioned before, the people sitting somewhere and have to do nothing, and there is a dequalification. The second lesson learned is reach out to families. What I mentioned before, it's the family contact. It's not just the individual. And the third one, we know it already, is reach out through community services. This is about a program. I really do like it, and I'm really happy that I have the possibility to mention it. And your question about social benefits and maybe it's sometimes better to get social benefits than get into the labor market. This is especially true in Germany. I mean, today we had a new study about the tax system. If you are married and you pay taxes together, we call it Ehegattensplitting. Yeah, it's much better if you work part-time. Yes, a small part-time, and your partner, you know, that is mostly the husband, works full-time, and it's much better, and you pay less taxes than if the woman or the wife works full-time. So these are the structural level we have to change. Maybe we can get other ideas from the other countries.
And I know, Susanne, that you also mentioned the social benefits and that it can work against women gaining access to the labor market. Could you share, and do you agree with the conclusion?
I agree. Something that we did in the early 70s in Sweden, though, is introduce separate taxation, and we built out nursery for young children and things like that, which improved the labor force participation rate enormously for women. So I think these are really important structural changes. And of course, if there are work norms from other countries that women are not supposed to participate in the labor market, and if the benefit system in sort of the host country is very generous, the system works against again. So it's important to look at the context. As I said, there is no one size fits all. There is not one measure that you should take on. You have to look into the entire system if you really want to make changes. And I think we really can learn from each other. That is very important too.
Thank you. I think we are coming to an end. If I can also just ask one last question. I see that one of the things that is also mentioned is the cooperation between the NGOs or the organization and state agencies. You have all mentioned that, and that's why I'm also glad that Sofia was here, also with the aspect of entrepreneurship, which is sometimes forgotten about. What are the cooperations between countries that we could learn better from each other? Is there any cooperation at this moment, Josephine, for instance, between the agencies to learn from each other and to have the best practice?
Yes, there are some really interesting cooperations between the state agencies. I know for a fact that our Swedish Employment Service has a very good cooperation with the French colleagues. And so Petra has been in Paris, for instance, to learn about how they work data-driven in order to make sure that we prioritize the job seekers who are far from the job market, for example. So absolutely, and I know that there is still a lot more we can do on this side, but we do have a cooperation.
Thank you. And any other one that I know that there is a cooperation between countries that could share? Because I think this webinar definitely shows that we have a lot to learn from each other. There's a lot of practice, although there is a difference in the migrants' origins and the reasons for migrating throughout Europe. There is a lot to be learned both from each other between the countries, but also I think between the agencies, the public sector and the NGOs, as well as academia. So on that note, and to make sure that we keep time, thank you so much to all of you for participating today. And I'm sure there will be reasons for us to, again, maybe be able to see each other in person in the future. I wish you had all been able to come here to Stockholm, which was the initial idea, but in the times that we are in, I'm still glad that you could participate like this online. So thank you. And again, thank you to the French and the German embassies here in Stockholm. And thank you for watching this. Please take care of yourself, take care of each other, and stay safe. Thank you for today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.